So yeah, fascinating discussion. Didn't realize we were already working for AI agents, so that was pretty enlightening. So this is the infrastructure and operations panel. And really what we wanted to do in this particular panel was discuss real-world case studies, because we've been talking about agents, we've been talking about AGI, but there's still a lot of issues that need to get solved, whether it's data infrastructure, hallucinations, and operationalizing AI. So would like for this panel to get into the details there. Maybe Debanjan, to start with you. You've been in the AI industry for a very long time. So just what business challenges and technology challenges do you see in bringing AI to production?
So, I am actually not as euphoric about where AI is, especially when it comes to putting AI in production. I think what I have seen in the last probably 2-3 years, there has been a lot of people who have bought GPUs, right? I mean, every year we sell about $100 billion worth of GPUs. There are a lot of people who have been creating chatbots, playing around with it. There have been some prototypes and some low-scale deployment of them. But we haven't really seen large-scale deployments of AI and AI agents, except probably for call centers. Call center is one place where we have seen that. And there are two primary issues that we see. One is that people are not confident about deploying them in production. And that is because they are not sure about, for example, the accuracy of what the output they're going to get. They are not always predictable. They're not sure about security and privacy leaks, and the CIOs are very concerned about that because that's what gets them in jail, right? And finally, with all this talk about AI agents and things about that, at the end of the day, you need somebody to be accountable. If something goes wrong, somebody needs to get fired, and you cannot fire an AI agent. You can, but some human ultimately needs to take responsibility for that. So I haven't seen that yet. That's one thing. Second, I think people have not been able to quantify the ROI that they're getting out of this, right? I mean, there is all this talk about it's going to improve your productivity. People are using, for example, various different tools to write code, and that is, by the way, happening. I see that in my company also. But when I ask them that, have you shipped out more features, or if your developers are 20% more productive, nobody can give that answer, right? I mean, it's not clear that the productivity gains that they are getting, are that being used in producing more output, or they are getting more coffee breaks, right? So that is another issue that I see, which probably is going to be important in order to make business sense out of this.
Wow. That's a lot. Yeah, it's how I tell my kids about the Instagram and TikTok that they use. You're sort of the same with AI and all the things AI should do better. So Yash, say more about what Debanjan just said about in call centers. I know you have customers that are starting to use Galileo in contact centers, improve performance. Just say some more.
Yeah, I think when it comes to AI agents, right? We are moving quickly into a world of autonomous agents, where the human is not in the loop. That is going to deliver the real ROI in your terms, Debanjan. But I think what we've seen where enterprises have actually succeeded when deploying agents in production is where you can actually capture the business needs and the expectation of the agents into real metrics and enforce those in production while the agent is live. Only then can you actually achieve true automation. We're entering a world of non-deterministic software here. It's a whole new playbook. And that actually needs strong evaluations at its core. In terms of the contact center example, in particular, if we can say, and a contact center use case can vary drastically from a company to company. Even within Citi, for example, you'll have contact centers for different aspects of different businesses, different services. And you need to define what the expectation of the agent is for that use case, not some generic expectations overall, and then enforce those in real time. Only then can you think of this as defining unit tests for these small applications that we're building and enforcing that expectation in production. We've seen actually agents live in production today in one of our large telco customers that is preempting internet outages in the world today. A completely autonomous agent.
Got it. So everybody on the panel is to convince Debanjan AI is real. So that's the of the panel. All right. So Barry, talk a little bit about some of the data challenges when it comes to deploying AI.
Yeah, there's definitely no shortage of data challenges. And actually, when I talked a lot to customers and partners, like everybody in this room probably, and I love saying dumb things out loud to them to get the conversation going. I was like, look, I'm going to say the super obvious thing. It turns out you can't have AI without data. And most people are like, yeah, that's super obvious. But you'd be amazed at how many people, like, you see the kind of proverbial light bulb go off above their head and like, oh yeah, it turns out I actually need to have data to be able to go do this. So what we've seen a lot, or what I've seen a lot, is these models, the foundation models out there, the OpenAIs and Anthropics and Geminis and Llama models are absolutely amazing and are great at orchestrating agents and great at doing all these things. But ultimately, a lot of the tooling, a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the capabilities, a lot of the use cases, like, we're still learning about. And I saw some tweet yesterday that I think was from the last week. Everybody keeps on saying, 2025 is the year of agents. He was like, look, 2020s is the decade of agents. If you think back, another quote, hey, you promised me flying cars. All we got was, 140 characters, referring to then Twitter, now X. Like, we're still early days of doing this. So a lot of the conversations I end up having about data is, hey, these models are absolutely awesome for asking like, what should I do in New York when it's 100 degrees outside? I don't want to go outside. What has amazing air conditioning for me to take kids to? Or, deep research into things like that. But a lot of the organizations I talk to are, what are the deterministic things that we can go ask about the data that's relevant to my business? How do I go drive sales? How do I go cut costs? How do I get better responses from my contact center? It turns out that if I reach out to an airline about a canceled flight, if it doesn't know what flight I'm already on and where I'm trying to get to and all those things, and just uses, an LLM to guess, and we saw this with, an airline a year ago hallucinating, giving a bunch of people refunds, like, that doesn't work out that well. But if you can ground that in data that's actually unique to that organization, unique to that individual, asking those questions, you get these, it hallucinates less, because you can go train these agents to go grab very, function call or tool calling to go grab very deterministic data. Like, we know Barry Dauber's calling. We know, I'm calling United Airlines because I'm trying to fly back to Newark. So, like, where can we route Barry that United flies in the New York metro area? Yeah. Right? Like, how can you start to make that without me having to go explain to somebody because that LLM's guessing? And that's kind of a silly example, but those deterministic outcomes, data is huge for that. I expect it to know who I am when I call. When I'm querying what are our sales data over the last year, starting with Q1, and then show it to me over a graph, I want that LLM to understand that, in Databricks' case, like, we're a 1-month offset. Start with February 1st, not January 1st. How do you train those models and have those systems understand to go pull that data, accordingly? It all comes down to the data at the end of the day.
That's great. So maybe, Debanjan, I want to come back to you, what you said about human liability, right? The fact that you can't fire an AI agent and human has to be in the loop. So what's the solution? You pose the problem, but what's your solution? We do want to get to the ROI that Yash is talking about. So what would you recommend companies do?
So, I mean, there are different ways of thinking about it, right? I mean, one, of course, is creating various different risk spectrum where you can take some risk and actually give it to the agents to do most, if not all, the work. And you don't really care if it says something wrong, or you can still fire somebody, but I mean, the agent probably will go away like that. But over a period of time, I think it is the accuracy of the answer in the context it is asked, that's what you need to solve. To give Barry's example, we do similar things with talk to your data, right? I mean, everyone goes to a business meeting where you're talking about the last 4 quarters, and somebody asks a question that, why did revenue go down in the 3rd quarter? And then you have to go back, do some analysis and come back. And if you can do that interactively, it's actually great. But there are a lot of latent problems. For example, in the database, there are probably 5 tables which called revenue. Which one of these is the right table, you don't always know. But you can learn that, you can train that, right? I mean, that's going to happen over a period of time as people use more and more of those questions. Initially, you will have more human in the loop, but over a period of time, I think you can take human off the loop, right? So I think starting with low-risk problems and making them autonomous, the higher ones, you have human in the loop to essentially put the guardrail and put the training wheels on, and you can test that over a period of time and take those training wheels off. That is the way to get to production, with reasonable level of confidence. But in some cases, I mean, for example, you still want a human to be accountable for that.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, Joby, coming to you, I mean, we talked about accuracy a lot. So what role does RAG play? Maybe demystify RAG for the audience that doesn't know the word, and like what role does RAG play in all of this?
Yes, certainly happy to do that. So RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. Think of retrieval augmenting with some kind of an LLM or some kind of a model, and doing a generative response or generative addition to the content which is already there. Maybe it is a prompt or any of those loopbacks on. I want to come back to some of the discussions we are having, right? So kind of agree with Dibanjo, but also agree with Yash and rest of the things. I think we are in the second innings of the whole game at this point. We have customers who are in production, and we have a lot of customers who are stuck in POCs. Contact center has been there for like ever. I think the place where people are starting to extract value is where unstructured information is stuck between structured information. So think of like a ticketing is open, but then there's a lot of chatter in between. Earlier, you couldn't do anything with it. Today, you can actually take that in, and you get a lot more insight. So now your customer agent is actually able to take stuff and make information on it. The other aspect on the production is like a lot of the customers who are going to production, I kind of classify into two buckets. Like the first bucket is people whose actual business model is threatened. So think of Perplexity coming in, changing e-commerce side of the house. And these are the guys who are going and putting stuff in production at billions of scale objects at this point. And then there are secondary customers who are like playing with it at this point because security, compliance, regulation, evaluation, all of these things are critical part because you don't want to screw up your brand, right? And that's why they are doing a lot of internal facing apps and building from there.
Yeah, I mean, are there AI, obviously you guys at Databricks have, a lot of customers. Are there customers that come to mind that have really embraced AI first, and are doing it very, very well, that you would cite as references to other customers?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot. And building on Joby's, I was thinking while he was talking, from a search perspective, I'd like to talk about the fun ones. There's lots of, contact center. But how do you ask very specific questions that require a lot of semantic understanding, but also fuzzy matching, but also timeliness of, hey, if I was watching the Oklahoma City Thunder game Sunday night and I asked it the current score, make sure it gives me the score of that game, not the game 3 days ago or 2 days ago, whatever it was. Those types of challenges, and maybe that's an easier example, but those types of challenges get really, really hard. How can you obviously have low latency, be able to have lots of concurrent users, be able to index lots of data as it's coming in live? Those are more fun because it's kind of B2B to C, right? All of us can go on our iPhones or Androids and start to go ask those questions. But then there's tons around powering contact centers, Experian in the financial services space, automated a lot of their email customer support, right? So like everybody's said, it comes down to, what Yash and Galileo are doing, and we do a lot of this too, is, my colleague has a line that I've co-opted, you can't build what you can't measure. And if you can't evaluate how well this agentic system or this model is performing for that task, you're going to get stuck in POC land. And we had to hit a certain threshold for them to be able to go do that. And you get very easy with the black and white, like we know that an LLM can respond to this one, we know an LLM should not respond to that one. But how do you start to deal with those in the middle? That all comes down to evaluation and how well your test data and training data ends up performing to be able to go evaluate that. Those are just a couple examples.
I think one thing I'll just add to that point is, we've been discussing a lot about the complexities of data being a roadblock, and there are tons of use cases out there that don't have a lot of data complexities. So like, we sometimes live in a bubble of like, okay, we have this corpus of data and it's always about asking questions on that data or doing something with the data. There are tons of use cases where it's just like end to end. Think of RPA. RPA is not built on data set. Like, these are processes that are automated and you can actually make them a lot more robust because traditional RPA is just hard-coded rules. And they're brittle. But you can actually reform RPA, all of the processes internally in an organization with agentic architectures. And they don't have all these data challenges at all. So let's not just be fixated on like data-related problems.
But one of the problems with RPA versus agentic, RPA is very deterministic,
Yes.
Yep.
right?
That's
And
right.
people like that determinism because they know what the workflow is.
Yes.
If they don't know what the workflow is, then they become nervous. What is this going to do?
That's why you need the guardrails
Yeah.
And
to actually prevent the agent from not behaving out of scope.
yeah, early days.
Yeah. So Yash, when coming to you, right? In a lot of your customers, AI is part of a larger picture, right?
Yeah.
So it just has to connect with other systems around it. How are your customers dealing with it? So that it has all the context, all the knowledge, all the data, all the systems. Like how are people solving those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, the complexity of AI workflows is just going to increase exponentially in the next coming years. We've gone far away from like just simple chatbots. We're entering a world of like micro agentic architectures. Think of even like cloud providers today are rethinking what Kubernetes looks like for agents. We have Kubernetes that runs different workloads, architectures in the cloud, and it scales them. Think of mini agents talking to each other and actually carrying out end-to-end workflows that are super powerful. We're headed towards that direction. And when it comes to integrations into data systems, into tools, into ticketing systems, back at your Salesforce or your CRMs, these are all like that's why MCP is becoming so popular. Is because now LLMs can access these tools, these backend systems via tool calls. Now, yes, there are open challenges to that are being solved today as we speak. For example, the two main challenges right now for agents to freely interact with enterprise systems are authentication and trust. Mm-hmm. Authentication and trust, and the trust part is what Galileo is focused on. And we are working with our partners on solving the authentication problem as well. And the trust piece is actually where it comes down to agents surfacing and being open about what they're doing internally. And if we're talking to multiple agents doing their entire workflow, to your point, Debanjan, about like RPA systems being very very controlled. Trust comes from observability, and then guardrails on top of that observability in real time, while you're accessing sensitive information. An agent shouldn't be accessing information on someone's behalf if they're not allowed to access that information. So authorization, authentication, and trust are the top two things that need to be fixed.
So maybe, Yash, talk a little bit more about MCP, right? We haven't really discussed MCP all day. Mm-hmm. What is it? What is MCP? What's A2A? Why is that important for companies too?
Yeah, so MCP, the Model Context Protocol, I mean, it's just built by Anthropic. It's an open source library. It's been picking up quite well. And more importantly, it's not rocket science. It's super simple. But what's beautiful about it is the programming paradigm of making tools. Tools can be, your Salesforce backend, your any kind of database. Let's think of a travel agent, for example. A travel agent helps you plan an itinerary and then helps you make the bookings. Now, for actually making the bookings, it's calling, maybe Priceline or Hotels.com or Airbnb, and all of these have APIs. So if you can simplify those APIs for the LLM and say, okay, make a reservation for me for this Airbnb location, it will call a tool. The LLM will be able to call a tool that hits this MCP server. And this MCP server translates that LLM call into an API call in the backend to Airbnb. So that's the nice part about why the world is actually revolving around MCP. But MCP is not the end-all, be-all. There are actually a lot more challenges when agents talk to other agents, and that's where A2A is. In fact, A2A, we've been partnering with them as well, and it's now part of Linux Foundation. It's an open standard, and AWS, Microsoft, Google, everyone's part of A2A now, which is needed. And I've been in the weeds of this efforts for a year now. But A2A is how can agents communicate with other agents. Both of these are autonomous systems. I'm just taking a simple case of 2 agents. There can be many more. And there are many things that need to be solved for when an agent talks to another agent. For example, you can't be hard coding how to call another agent. You can't tell an agent only to talk to one agent. It should be able to discover other agents that can solve its problem. Okay, I want to make a hotel reservation. I'm going to search for an agent that can help me make the hotel reservation. Think of DNS, but for agents. Also, there's going to be security and authentication, as I mentioned, between agents. How do you pass in auth tokens? How do you encrypt conversations between tokens? Because every agent cannot ask for an SSL certificate. So there's peer-to-peer encryption happening between agents. So this A2A is just a protocol. But as part of our agency efforts, agency is another open collective, which is merging with A2A. We've built tools and infrastructure, which is open source, for everyone to adopt this standard and this pattern for multiple agents to talk to each other.
No, that's great, Yash. I mean, I want to move from development to production, but just to summarize, just in the development side itself, right? Trust, authorization, data, context, evaluation, ROI, there's just a lot, integrations, there's a lot to solve on the development side. To going to production, so Debanjan, your company has several hundred customers. So as you think about scaling Gen AI in the production side, how does it look different from AutoML, which your company pioneered, and moving into Gen AI and agentic? So what does hyperscaling look like on what are the challenges in production that companies should start thinking about already?
So AutoML was primarily on the development side, which is essentially searching through the hyperparameter space and giving the best model possible. We have actually done, by the way, a parallel of that called Shifter, which we open sourced. And if you think about the whole RAG space or agentic space, there's so many different options. That space is 10 raised to the power 23, and finding the right setup, the models and the embedding models and the prompting strategies and the re-rankers, et cetera, is very complex, right? So that is something we have done. It's more on the development side. On the operational side, it is also quite complex, right? I mean, if you think about an agentic workflow, first of all, it's dynamic. Second, it is really a DAG of various different LLMs and predictive models and the tools and other agents, which you now have to go and deploy in the infrastructure that you have, right? And that deployment is also pretty complex, and especially if you think about optimizing it for scale, optimizing it for cost, optimizing it for proximity to data, that can be quite complex. And we have a framework to do that. We actually acquired a company who actually does a pretty good job of doing that. But that's the deployment part of it. And after that, you have to do tracing, you have to do logging, because God forbid, if the agent does something you don't like and you have to go and debug it, it's not an easy thing to do, right? And then, there are other things that you need to do. I mean, of course, you deploy it, and there could be data drift, there could be model drift, there could be concept drift. You have to continuously monitor them and make sure it's not a one-time thing. I mean, you have to do that continuously. It's almost like a CI/CD pipeline, where not only when code changes, when data changes, you have to rebuild, redeploy, remonitor, and continue that cycle, right? So all of these things are pretty complex, but good thing is, people have solutions. What I have found difficult for our customers to do, for them to put together an end-to-end lifecycle management of agents or even RAG pipelines, they don't have one platform where they can do that. There are multiple open source components, multiple ISVs. Even if you go to a hyperscaler environment, you have to stitch together 12 different services to have that platform. And that is really problematic for a lot of our customers.
Great. Now I want to bring in the data experts here on the model and data drift. So Barry, the Fox example that you talked about, how would they handle, new games, new types of commentary they want to do, so the models probably needs to change, their data is constantly changing. How are customers that are deploying it at scale across hundreds of millions of users dealing with model drift, data drift?
I mean, it's all the same things Debanjan talked about. And I would say the underlying thing for all of this, I think where we've seen a lot of customers struggle, and I know depending on what stat you trust, it's like 80 to 85% of POCs don't make it into production, is evaluation, which we've talked about a lot on stage, is probably number one or number two, but either number one or number two, depending on how you want to do this. It all comes down to governance of that data. So Yash talked about authentication. How do you make sure that person has access to that information is hard? And you do this not just at the data, but at your models and agentic in kind of your AI layer, if that creates another layer. You need to be able to govern across all this. So when an agent goes and asks a question and pulls from a Salesforce record, what Yash is able to see is probably different than what I'm able to see within that organization. And how do you start to translate that from the data world into the AI world? That gets to be really hard. You need a platform that basically can govern across all of that data and AI. But ultimately, it comes down to evaluation and governance for these Fox examples or other customers that have been able to get to production. Because as everybody can imagine, I like the use of the CI/CD line. I use that all the time. And it didn't actually solve a lot of these problems that were relevant to customers' data. How did you start to go figure out what use cases it could solve for that you could then go jump that, chasm to go take that into production? And it starts with, doing what you would do in a CI/CD or software development lifecycle. You start with the data, you have to go deploy it, these models or systems. You have to go monitor all these, do all the LLM ops, and then you have to go evaluate how well is that doing. Hopefully you're governing that as well and securing it. But it's not a one and done. How do you make sure that you're constantly, as these models drift, as the data drifts, you're able to identify it, go fix that root cause? Because you have governance and auditability, you can go back to where that data came from. So if some A2A protocol or system you're pulling from, went offline or the data changed, you could go fix that. That will then have those downstream effects. And I think there's going to be a lot more of this as these systems get much, much, much wider.
Totally. Yeah. Are there questions for the panel? Do we have some questions in the audience?
Oh, we got a question.
Okay. Please state your name as well, and then ask the question.
Hi, this is Saurabh. I think it's an interesting discussion which you guys have curated so far. Financial services is probably the most where people have to build trust to use some of these models, right? Is there a use case either in B2C or B2B space where you see the applicability now versus 5 years from now?
Debanjan, you want to take that? You have a lot of financial services customers.
Yeah, I mean, so we have been in the financial services industry for a very long time, starting with predictive model. And what we are seeing, a lot of people are essentially building around some of those predictive model with generative capability. Let's say, for example, you have a fraud use case where you have a model which kind of triggers an evaluation whether a particular transaction is fraudulent or not, and you have to fill a suspicious activities report, right? You can do that automatically now with generative AI based on various different features that you have identified, which is triggering this fraudulent transaction. So we see a whole bunch of use cases where people are already using, let's say, some of the risk model and the fraud models and the AML models, and they are building, for example, a model risk management pipeline. A lot of that is automated with generative AI to generate these reports automatically.
I think it's that, building on that. I agree with all that. You can also now join both unstructured and structured data in kind of the Gen AI world. Joby was talking about this earlier.
Yep.
Another big use case in financial services and across any operation or corporate for that matter, it starts off being the less sexy use cases, but just contracts, right? HR data. In financial services, there's lots of deal flow information. How do you go extract at scale, across hundreds of thousands, millions of documents with really high degrees of accuracy? LLMs and these models are really, really good at what you'd call intelligent document processing, or at the end of the day, it's just batch inference, right? You're training a model to be very, very, very good at doing entity extraction of contract dates, or fuzzy matching of very specific things in contract language at scale, where that accuracy matters. I know we have a customer, First American. Accuracy for them directly impacts their bottom line. And they had to do information extraction at massive scales with all the contracts and loan documents coming in. And if you can increase their accuracy just 1-2%, that's immediately millions of dollars in savings that a human doesn't have to go adjudicate against if that's right or not. So lots and lots and lots of kind of back office use cases, especially in financial services, you can just go at scale with in kind of the Gen AI world.
I think I'd like to just simplify this a little bit in terms of trust when it comes to agentic systems. It's about the accuracy, but also not just data. Your agents could be making API calls to other tools and systems, and what if those API parameters are different, right? So just in terms of accuracy, it applies to every aspect, not just the data, but every aspect in the workflow of an agent. So typically, the best practice that we recommend is think of this as, and look, we talked about so many things that we need for production. It's all about software development best practices. We've been doing this for decades, okay? And so let's not think about this as it's too much. We've been doing CI/CD, we've been doing testing, we've been having good observability and monitoring. Yes, there will be vendors that have to think about observability for agents in production, but as developers, we have been doing this all along. If you're building an agent, think about this as writing unit tests and doing test-driven development for every step along the way. Along with that, add some of the business expectations in your tests, and you should be able to evaluate those at every step. So accuracy is important all along.
I would add a couple more financial services use cases is that I think what's having real impact on production today, right? There had been a lot of keywords-based information retrieval type of use cases which have been built up. They're getting modernized because now you can actually get those information which is structured and unstructured combined and build up like Morningstar, FactSet. A lot of these companies are actually rebuilding their architecture. It goes back to the previous discussion which we were having in the developer, panel, where we're talking about you really need a newer approach because the whole stack is getting changed at this point. And that's what we are basically seeing, where almost a lot of the existing legacy stacks are getting totally disrupted, and there's a rebuilding happening. A lot of the same problems around taking to production, governance, all of this comes in, but I don't think that's been fully solved yet, but it will get solved, but because it's a totally new stack, is how we see it.
So Debanjan, are you convinced after you have heard? Yash is very optimistic, all these problems will be solved. Barry thinks all the data problems already solved. And then, Joby's right there with Brad.
I joined this AI company because I think future is bright. The next frontier is AI. So I'm not pessimistic about it. I'm just realistic about what are the things we need to do in order to make it work in production. And oftentimes it's not the sexy part, it's actually the boring, tedious part that you need to fix in order to get value out of it.
Yeah, totally. Debanjan and I come from web services. We have a lot of scars from 15 years ago. We have seen where things are. So I worry when MCP and excitement shows up in that, how real it will be. So we'll see. But there's a lot to be done there.
That's right.
That's great. So we'll break for lunch. We are at time, and we'll reconvene for some demos right after lunch. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.